For 2023 and 2024, is it still Trump's GOP, or is there a chink in the armor? Let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show. Thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you live from our BNC studios here in lovely Eastern Indiana. And today we're going to talk about all things Donald Trump, the GOP, and to help me do that, welcoming us back to the Brian Nichols Show, Kenny Cody. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me back on, brother. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. It's been a long time.
It's been a while, but don't worry, folks. We're going to be having these conversations much more frequently. Kenny and I are we're aiming for this, right, Kenny? Once a week, you and I will sit down. We'll go through some of the news of the week, have a bit of a conversation. You obviously coming from more of a conservative mindset, and me trying to bring some of the libertarian perspectives here to the table and hopefully have some information that the audience can take away, leaving them, of course, educated, enlightened, and informed. But Kenny, before we go into today's topic of conversation, which is Trump and the GOP, do us a favor. It's been a while, like you said, since you were back here on the show. Reintroduce yourself to the audience.
Well, guys, my name is Kenny Cody. I'm an economics teacher at Cosby High School. That's where I actually sit currently. I'm a columnist at newsmax.com and thenationalpulse.com. Had pieces written for townhall.com, the Washington Examiner, the Daily Wire, and recently, about 2 months ago, Newsweek, so pretty well versed in some professional outlets. And of course, I'm the chairman of the Cott County Republican Party here in East Tennessee and the Southern Director for the Republicans for National Renewal, a nationalist populist approach to Republican politics. And we're pretty active in that market and finding good candidates to run for our ideology as well. So that's me. Been a reoccurring guest on the Brian Nichols Show, and glad to be back.
We're excited to have you as a part of the family, man. You're good people, and we talk about surrounding ourselves with good people here on the Brian Nichols Show. I think we did a good job with you. And don't worry, video fan, Kenny's not in a penitentiary. It's just the design of the building he's in right now. So no fears there. Our Kenny is locked up away. But otherwise, Kenny, again, thank you for returning to the show. And let's talk about your latest banger over on Newsmax, and that is Trump still defines the GOP. Now, this was written shortly after the Caitlin Collins Donald Trump interview, town hall, debate, whatever you want to call it, where Trump obviously just stole the night, right? I mean, Trump was able to be there on stage, command the room, get the audience involved, and they were cheering him. And you saw that the wind was just deflated out of the sails of CNN. Talk to us, Kenny. Is Trump right now the absolute guaranteed frontrunner for the GOP, or is there a chink in the armor? Is someone like a Ron DeSantis, who has been absolutely a stalwart down in Florida, able to take away some of his support? What are your thoughts?
Trump's the guy. That's completely my thought. I watched the CNN town hall and was overtly impressed, even for my standards. I mean, I'm a Trump guy. I think anybody knows that I am MAGA, that I'm a populist, and he's my dude. But I mean, he absolutely dominated a mainstream television program that garnered 3.1 million viewers. And I think a lot of that was because of these politically motivated questions. I mean, I think, coming off the E. Jean Carroll case, coming off the New York defamation case, coming off of just a couple of different lawsuit controversies, I was a little bit nervous, to be quite honest. I didn't know how Trump would respond. I think he would just attack the legal field, or would attack the person who was, attacking him. And he did a little bit of that. I'm not saying he didn't. But the way he mastered it and made it look politically motivated, pointed out things about this person and Alvin Bragg and E. Jean Carroll that were completely politically motivated. I mean, they had no ulterior ambitions. It wasn't for the good. It wasn't for, and not to attack these people. I mean, I'll attack Alvin Bragg, but I have no idea the personality of E. Jean Carroll. But the points that he brought up in making everything look exactly how it looks to the American public, the two impeachments, the January 6th stuff being portrayed off on him, having January 6th protesters put in prison longer than a lot of people who are violent offenders have been. And then you have the E. Jean Carroll and the Alvin Bragg cases that just look like our judicial system has been weaponized. I mean, it was very, very exemplary performance by him to make it look politically motivated. And then you have policies such as immigration. You have policies such as foreign policy, especially especially, which I think, ironically enough, was his best answer of the night.
Yeah.
Caleb Collins kept on pressing him about, who do you think should win this war? Who you have to say, you got to want Ukraine to win this war. He said, I don't want anybody to win this war. I don't want people to die. That should be the absolute answer for any Republican nominee for president of the United States 2024. And in fact, it should be the answer to any Democratic nominee. Of course, they're going to cheer for Ukraine because Russia bad. But the parameter for the Republican nomination in 2024 should be, we need to stop foreign aid to Ukraine completely, and we need to audit what we've already sent, and we need to make sure that there are going to be no boots on the ground in Ukraine and Russian war from the United States military. And we need to work towards a peaceful resolution. And that's entirely what Donald Trump talked about in his town hall. And I know people get tired of this braggadocious nature. I know I've heard plenty of complaints like, if Trump would have been there, then this one never would have happened. If Trump would have been there right now, he would have negotiated peace. But there is evidence to suggest that would probably be true. I mean, you talk about all the Middle East peace contracts, all the Middle East treaties that were signed during the Trump administration. You talk about how he was the first president not to get us into a new war since the 1920s, 1910s. In literal decades, he was one of the first of the modern era not to get us into a completely new war interventions. So really, where was he false on that? And then he held Biden to account on immigration. Again, he addressed the political motivated attacks on him as being looked at as the American people see them as completely politically motivated, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. He didn't get arrested because he's a private citizen and these were just acts. He got arrested because he was a former president and they were completely weaponized the judicial system of New York. So I think that you have to look on a broad basis of, is he the best nominee for 2024? Of the declared and the guest candidates that are going to be, I would say yes. He leads every single primary poll by 30 points or more. DeSantis has sunk in the polling, even though he hasn't announced yet, but he's expected to announce next week. He's fell 30 points since just December. I think his strategy is poor. I think Trump's is immaculate. I think the only thing Trump needs to do now is probably get back on Twitter and get back on Facebook and be more active, a little bit more on social media for the younger generation. But I think he's doing a great job so far, and he'll probably continue to dominate even through the debates.
Now, Kenny, I got to give a little pushback here because I think the one area that Trump has just without a doubt just dropped the ball, and that has been his approach and response to the lockdowns and then the aftermath of the lockdowns. Now, here's a recent Truth Social from Donald Trump. When the Ron DeSanctimonious facts come out, you'll see that he is better than most Democrat governors, but very average at best against Republican governors. How about the fact that he had the third most deaths of any state as governor on the China virus? Even Cuomo did better, number 4. He shut down everything, even his beaches. Other Republican govs didn't. Look at the Disney mess. Could have worked an easy settlement, but no, he's wanted the fake news to show what a tough guy he is. He's not. Kenny, I mean, you and I both went through the past 3 years of the COVID insanity. And let's be real, right? A lot of the COVID insanity was fostered and ultimately promoted, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, promoted by Trump. He promoted lockdowns / shutting the government down and shutting down localities, shutting down businesses. He promoted the vaccine. He promoted, and then after he was done, what was it? He gave like a medal of something to Fauci, right? Like he was the reason that Fauci was the face of the lockdown response. So I guess when it came to one of the most just damning things that we've seen over the past few years, or in recent memory for that matter, I think just Trump failed, across the board. And for me, that just seems like, wouldn't that be for you as a conservative, a big red flag when you're looking at what I would dare say has been the most important issue that has impacted every single one of us over the past 3 years?
One quote that I keep coming back to, because this has been definitely criticism of mine as well. And I wish Trump would kind of lay off when it comes to COVID, because I visited Florida during COVID. Florida was open. It was free. And I personally have no criticisms against Ron DeSantis when it comes to COVID. But one quote that I remember, and it comes from a mutual friend of ours. Austin Peterson was asked in 2020, why are you voting for Donald Trump? It was the first time he had voted actually for a presidential nominee of the Republican nomination in quite literally years. And his response, he did a space or a periscope or something. I forget what the model that he used at the time was. I don't know if that was before Spaces or afterwards. But he let his viewers come on, his followers come on and ask him. And he said, more than any other president since FDR, he was offered the opportunity to be a fascist, and he wasn't. He was offered more power, through government power to implement lockdowns on martial law on the United States. And regardless of rhetoric, regardless of what he said to the press, and regardless of what he did or tried to do or demonize people to do, he didn't use that power. He didn't declare martial law. He didn't make governors shut down. Now, governors made their own decisions. Bill Lee, Ron DeSantis, Brian Kemp, other governors in other states, Kristen Inu in New Hampshire, other governors made decisions. But ultimately, it was left up to the states, which is ultimately the best part of republicanism. It's federalism. It's allowing states to do what they want to do, minus and separate from the federal government. And I think that while I have my own criticisms of how Trump handled the COVID crisis, we kind of forget where the rhetoric shifted, because did Trump lock down, or was he faulted for not locking down? Right. So Fauci was an advisor. Okay. He advised the NIH. He advised the health departments to do what they wanted to do. And yes, I agree that Fauci was the reason that a lot of these governors decided to shut down, especially in Democratic-led states. But the fact that Trump did not force these governors to lock down, and he could have. You had a lot of Democrats and you had a lot of those in state departments that wanted him to shut down, that wanted him to go, we are overriding state law, we are overriding law in general, and we are going to shut down. And he was declared basically a nut for that. It's one of the reasons why he lost the election in 2020 was because he was faulted for the COVID-19 crisis and people dying because he didn't do enough, right? So my whole thing is everybody made mistakes in 2020. Everybody made mistakes through COVID. And I was one of the most, I agree with you completely. I was among the columnists that were demonizing people who were locking people down in their homes, and the state governors that were locking people down in their homes. But I also have to sit back and reflect going, well, at least my own governor had his own decision to make. And Bill Lee, I think, did a great job here in Tennessee in not shutting down. He allowed businesses to make their own decisions about masking, about indoor masking, about opening back up or closing down, just doing drive-through, whatever you might want to talk about there, or whatever you might want to have an approach or a policy there. But ultimately, in a lot of states, it was up to the state governors. And while I wish that Trump would have spoken out more against state governors that did have these authoritarian mandates and these authoritarian lockdowns, ultimately he could have implemented his power as the head executive of the United States and shut us completely down, and he didn't. And I personally am thankful for Trump for that. Now, again, I think that his criticisms of DeSantis are unfounded. I think that DeSantis did a great job during COVID. I think people like Bill Lee, Brian Kemp, South Carolina's governor, did a good job during the COVID-19 crisis in ensuring that there was no authoritarian mandates in those states. And I do not wish that he would just attack DeSantis solely for that. But ultimately, I think that the Trump idea that he shut people down, and even if he advised it, and yes, his words definitely may have encouraged governors to shut more down, right? He encouraged he kind of defaulted Brian Kemp.
He went after Brian Kemp, yeah,
yeah. I mean, that definitely happened, and I completely agree that he shouldn't have done that, and he shouldn't have went after DeSantis. He shouldn't have run after Republican governors for opening up too early. I absolutely agree. That's one of my criticisms. But ultimately, I think it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to say that he was this authoritarian and he empowered lockdowns and all that kind of stuff when he literally had it in the palm of his hand, the things he could have done. And he would have been supported by not only most Democrats, not only by most independents, but I would think about 30, probably 75% Republicans at that time, other than libertarian kind of ideologues like you and me, in terms of our approach to government power, would have supported that decision. And he still didn't. And I keep on that every time I think of COVID and Trump, I keep on thinking back to that Austin Peterson quote. And I don't know if Austin still feels that way. I have no idea. But I was one of his viewers that day. I was one of the followers that tuned in because I wanted to hear what he had to say. I had no idea that he was going to support Trump in 2020. And the fact that he said that he had it there, he had the option to grab that gun, or he had the option to grab that lever, push that button and say, we are locking down the entire country. And he didn't do that. I have to respect that. And it's going to be very difficult for me to say that he empowered authoritarianism. I think he made mistakes. Absolutely. I think a lot of governors, a lot of politicians made mistakes. I've never know if I've ever said this. I got the vaccine, Brian. I was one of the people who got the vaccine when I was a school employee here. I was a teacher. And looking back, I wouldn't have got it, but that was a mistake that I made. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of that was he made a lot of mistakes, as did any governor, any politician, any employee, anybody in the United States made a lot of discretionary and bad decisions at that point. But I think that Trump definitely needs to lay off the attacks of COVID. Just don't refer to it at all, if anything, because he, again, gave power and a say to people like Fauci, to people like Deborah Birx, right? I mean, that's a complete mistake. But I fall short in saying that he was the reason for lockdowns, and he was, and which a lot of Democrats, a lot of DeSantis people argue that he was the reason for governors locking down, when he did ultimately leave it up to state governors. And that's really all we can ask for. He can't say these people are shut down, then they shouldn't be shut down, so I'm going to overturn their shutdown. That's also an override of federal government power, right? That's leaving it up to a state to do something. So I ultimately give credit to Trump for allowing states to open up, but I also criticize him for empowering people like Deborah Birx and Anthony Fauci.
I just get super nervous, man, because my great grandpa, he used to have a saying. It's like, when people show you who they are, believe them. Right. And not only did he promote and really help support people like Fauci or Birx or Walensky over at the CDC, but he also put people like John Bolton into positions of power. He was cozying up with Lindsey Graham, even though he gives subtle jabs about Lindsey Graham being a rhino. Like, he surrounds himself with people that we in the greater conservative, libertarian, liberty movement, whatever you want to classify ourselves as here, he ends up putting himself in positions where he's buddying up with people that we rightfully point at as saying, no, bad, not good. Now, to the contrary, right? There are times when Trump does decent, where he's on the debate stage in South Carolina pointing at Jeb Bush saying, your brother lied us into war. And you're like, oh, snap, he said that. Or when he cozies up with folks like Rand Paul and able to get some of Rand Paul's ideas brought forth. But at the same point in time, I see so much of the opposite as well, that I look at someone like Trump and I get very nervous, because I've seen who he has been over the past, well, not over the past 4 years, but back when he was in the White House for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. And I guess that goes to another part of my question here, Kenny, and that is going to one of the parts you raised up in the article, and that is the electability standpoint, right? Where we basically had in is it Kentucky? Kentucky, where we had the recent primary, and the Trump endorsed candidate clobbered the field, right? And that was against a Ron DeSantis endorsed candidate. But when we go back to 2020, or 2022, rather, when we had a conversation just after the election, we were going through all these different Trump endorsed candidates. They got their butts kicked, right? When we went to the actual general election, they may have won their primaries, but when your average voter started to go to the voting booth and looking at the different Trump candidates, whether it was Baldock in New Hampshire, Oz in Pennsylvania, down in Arizona with the what was his name?
Masters.
Yeah, Masters. Thank you. You saw that each of those candidates ended up getting their butts kicked. And I guess it goes to my next question is, are we looking at Trump as a representative of a base of Republican voters who are just they're on board with the persona and not looking necessarily at the long-term implications of the vote? Or is there something else here at play?
Yeah, that's a good question. The electability argument is always very weird to me, and I think I actually tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago. I think there were so many factors in 2020 and 2022 that we have to consider when we look at electability. So let's look at 2020, right? Let's look at the allowed universal mail-in. Let's look at the pandemic that was blamed upon Donald Trump. I mean, we had the highest turnout in United States history in terms of voters, right? And of course, we all know that when voter turnout is high, Republicans lose, no matter what. That's been true of all of American history. When the turnout has increased in a state, in a county, or whatever, if there's a Republican and Democrat in a close race, every single time the Democratic wins. Okay, that's one of the reasons why I think universal mail-ins were allowed at the time, because of the COVID-19 crisis, and were pushed for so heavily by Democrats, because they know that gives them an inherent advantage. On average, it's like an 84, 85% Democratic to Republican turnover when it comes to mail-in ballots, whether that's military, whether that's absentee through medical procedures, whatever. So now when you have universal mail-ins, it gives an inherent advantage to Democrats for 2020. Okay, so now let's look at the global pandemic of COVID-19. Okay, so a lot of the reasons that I think Trump was lost in 2020 was because a lot of people blamed him for a disaster. Okay, whether it's been economic downturn, whenever a recessionary sort of economic period happens, the president always loses. That's also another common trend throughout American presidential politics, is when there is an economic downturn, and I'm not talking about like a recession. I'm talking about an absolute downturn, loss of jobs, corporations losing money, people losing their jobs, all that kind of stuff, and people having to find their employees, stocks going down, whatever you want to look at in economics. When it's a huge downturn like COVID is affected by that, affects the economy like that, the president always loses. So now we have two sets of two factors that have affected Donald Trump negatively in 2020. Now let's go ahead to 2024. You're going to have an incumbent president who has a 38% approval rating on average for the RCP. Okay. Now, Trump's, going to be honest, Trump's is not much better, right? I mean, it's not much better among the electorate, especially not among independents. However, while you have the incumbency clause, while you have incumbents that are usually favored to be somewhat, probably like a non-betting odds favorites, Joe Biden's probably going to be favored at 2024. I think that when you have an incumbent that is so unpopular, incumbency can be a very bad thing. It's kind of why a lot of Democratic voters, in terms of polling, have said we want somebody else besides Joe Biden. Okay, that wouldn't be asked of Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or anybody else, but I think like 73% of Democrats want an alternative to Joe Biden. Now, Robert F. Kennedy doesn't have a chance. Okay, I want to make that perfectly clear. He has absolutely no chance. But the fact the dude is polling double digits against an incumbent president is insane. Okay, I think it's very underrated that it's insane. And people could say, well, DeSantis and Haley and all of them are polling against Trump. He's also been out of office for 4 years. He's just a candidate. He's not the incumbent president. He's not the current office holder, right? So you have RFK going against Biden. That's a pretty revealing thing that there's even somewhat of a percentage of the Democratic population who are inherently more partisan than Republicans are. Republicans find a lot of reasons to be at odds with themselves and at war with themselves in general. Democrats don't. Democrats always pony up and get behind who their guy is every single time. And even they're finding faults in their current guy. So now you say, let's look at the 2022 midterms and the performances. So I think I actually come on this podcast and talked about how Lee Zeldin and Ron DeSantis were pretty much the reasons that the Republicans kept the House. And that's absolutely true.
You were.
But I think I also remember saying something in the past, and I think I've said on your show, I think I've said on a couple others, that the reason the Republicans didn't do well is because when Trump endorses somebody and Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, people don't show up no matter what. You can say you're Trump endorsed. You can say, Donald Trump backs me, all this kind of stuff. But when you have a cult of personality like Donald Trump that has endorsed you, but yet you're not running on the same ballot as Donald Trump, you're going to have trouble no matter what. You are going to have a severe amount of trouble if a cult of personality. Obama struggled with the same thing in 2010. When Obama was there and got elected in 2008, everybody loved Obama. All the candidates won, all the Democrats won, all that kind of stuff. But in 2010, when the Tea Party movement became involved, it didn't matter who Obama endorsed. They all got beat. The Tea Party movement succeeded in the Senate, it succeeded in state legislatures, and it succeeded in the House of Representatives and in gubernatorial races as well. So when the GOP relies so heavily on the cult of personality, it can be a good and a bad thing. You rely very heavily on presidential election years. Now, it just so happens to be when this cult of personality ran again, universal mail-ins, and I'm not going to come on here and rant about how the election was stolen and all that kind of stuff. I'm not one of those guys. But I think it's hard to argue that the universal mail-ins didn't affect Democratic turnout. That's a difficult argument for anybody, any independent to make. It absolutely affected Democratic turnout, and it essentially beat Donald Trump. Not saying it's rigged, not saying it's stolen. That's just a fact. If not as many Democrat voters would have voted in 2020 because of mail-in ballots, Donald Trump would have got beat. That's a thing we can all accept, right? I think that's why people are scared to 2024. But I think Trump had two adverse circumstances that do not happen to most incumbent presidents. You had an economic downturn because of a global pandemic that affected the entire world, and then you had universal mail-ins. If you take those two factors, I don't know if any Republican period could have survived, whether they're electable or not. I don't think that any Republican could have survived that, or not only any Republican, any incumbent. It wouldn't matter if he was Democratic or Republican, he would have got beat no matter what, because 2020 was a weird year and it will always go down as a weird year. So when I look at the electability argument, I just don't know how much I buy, okay? Because DeSantis is himself a Trump endorsee. He himself is a Trump endorsed guy that won his primary and won the governorship because he was endorsed by Donald Trump. So how much is the electability argument really buy if the reason that Ron DeSantis succeeded and the reason that he is the current governor of Florida was because of Donald Trump? How is that same guy more electable than the man himself? I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that DeSantis may have a little bit more leeway with independents. I'm not saying that Trump does either. but it's hard for me to buy that DeSantis is just this huge overturn of Donald Trump. I just don't think that there's that much difference between the two guys. I don't believe people are all going to say, no, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, but I would vote for Ron DeSantis. I don't believe there is a sustainable, significant portion of our population or undecided voters that would say that, because I think DeSantis is a Trump guy. And I know that the media is trying to separate the two right now. But I don't believe there's that much difference besides DeSantis maybe being a little bit more polished and has a really bad voting record in Congress. But besides that, I just don't believe that there's that much there. So when I look at electability, I understand the argument, and I get that a lot of people think that DeSantis is more electable. And in polling, I guess there is some sort of statistical difference. But I just don't think there's that much in like winning or losing. I don't believe that argument. Quite honestly.
I just find, and trust me, I have my reservations with DeSantis, but I find that when I look at what DeSantis has been able to do as governor of Florida, while there are absolutely things from a libertarian perspective I raise concern with, I also look to see that he has been pretty much 100%, with a few exceptions, on the most important issue over the past 3 years. And then to look at a lot of the unforced errors that Trump brings upon himself, Ron doesn't do that, right? Ron is running a very well-oiled machine. He knows how to take on the media, much like Trump does, but he does it more in the Carrie Lake way. He likes to turn things back on the reporters versus just saying, you're a nasty woman. Like he does things in, I guess, more of that, quote, politician type of way. But I guess going back to the electability standpoint, Kenny, is that's how, unfortunately, a lot of your average voters, they go to the voting booth looking for someone that they can trust, right? They know that their vote isn't going to be wasted. And I look at someone like Trump, and there is so much negative that goes along with him, whether it's warranted or not, that I think we're instantly going to see a large portion of those independent, moderate, or undecided voters, they'll drift away. And I'm looking at that from what we've seen happen in the past. Despite all the things that Trump has been able to try to do to rekindle his image, I think that will always stick with him, that the Trump persona, for both the good and the bad, right? The good being that for all of his supporters that are out there who were supporters in 2016 and 2020 and beyond, they're going to be supporting him in 2024. We know that. But to the folks who maybe supported him in 2016, jumped off the wagon in 2020, what is there to bring them back beyond just the cataclysmic failure that has been the Biden administration, right? And if that's what we're foiling against, then I would say it makes more sense from the standpoint of not just an electability standpoint, but also actually being effective in government and in governance, with having someone like Ron DeSantis lead that ticket, because I've seen what he's done in Florida. And again, there are things that we'll raise fault with, but to see what he's done in Florida and done so successfully, I think it speaks to he has the acumen to take this to the White House. Now, this is not me endorsing DeSantis by any stretch of the imagination, but more so trying to call balls and strikes as we're looking at things today. I think for every positive that you raise up for Trump, there is an equal, if not maybe a little bit more weighted negative. And we have to maybe address that going forward with the primaries obviously starting to tick up here as we get towards the end of 2023 into 2024. So let me ask you this, Kenny, because I'm looking at Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump as the inevitable duo that we're going to be facing here throughout the primaries. But do you see anybody else in the GOP electorate right now that might stand as not maybe an RFK figure, but someone who can actually, toss in the proverbial hand grenade into this equation and blow things up? Someone like a Vivek Ramaswamy, or someone that hasn't even announced at this point. Anybody on your radar?
I mean, you look at the declared candidates. I think you've got Trump, you've got DeSantis, you've got Nikki Haley, you've got Mike Pence, you've got Tim Scott, and you've got Vivek Ramaswamy. I think those are the people. I mean, you've got Asa Hutchinson, but between you and me and your audience, who cares? He should drop out right now. Vivek is definitely somebody that I think can push the narrative. I think I would be very interested in seeing, because Vivek is just so Trumpian, so populist, but he comes from a private sector experience that I think could really be interesting on a debate stage. And
much like Trump in 2015, for what it's worth.
Right, exactly. So I mean, I think he's a very interesting figure. I've actually liked and retweeted a lot of his stuff. I think he has sort of it's a weird thing. He is very far libertarian on some things, and also very populist, very nationalist on a lot of things, which is a very, very differing amounts of ideological difference there. But I think Vivek and maybe Tim Scott solely because I think he has sort of this moderate appeal. I think he has sort of this independent, like tune in to the independence, like learning how to reach, learning how to speak, learning how to address criticism, things like that. I think that's a very interesting perspective that he comes from. So Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't think Nikki Haley hardly brings anything to the table, maybe a little bit on diplomacy. If she wants to talk about like her UN experience or her experience as a governor in South Carolina, maybe. But I don't think there's anybody else really on the stage. I mean, it'll be, I guess, kind of interesting to see him and Pence kind of trade blows back and forth on the debate stage, but I don't think that's anything that's going to actually help Donald Trump, to be quite honest with you. I mean, January 6th stuff, maybe, like that might make Trump look a little bit better if he has to answer questions or different approaches as to Pence, but especially when it comes to things like foreign, like the three issues to me that a president deals with is the economy, the immigration, and foreign policy, right? Like those are the three things that I think every president has got to deal with. And of course, who your cabinet is and things like that. But to me, there's nobody better on foreign policy in the entire field than Trump. I mean, you look at DeSantis' record in Congress, wasn't great. You know, I mean, I think the best thing that DeSantis did when he was in Congress was vote for I think Syrian withdrawal was the only thing he ever really advocated for. I mean, you had Vivek's pretty well on it, but you haven't really seen any proof of what he would do. I mean, he has sort of perspectives and things like that. But then you have Trump, who, like you said, did do things like hire John Bolton and things, but I mean, overall was probably the best foreign policy president we've had since Calvin Coolidge in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I think he was the best we've had this since the 20s. Then you look at immigration. DeSantis was a little bit weaker than Trump on that, and he voted for, he kind of had some perspective like maybe wanted to have amnesty. And you have Vivek Ramaswamy, who is an immigrant who is pretty tough on immigration, but is also not really proven anything besides what he said in the past. Then you have Nikki Haley, who has pretty much promoted that she is okay with legal immigration, and legal immigration are people, they're legal immigrants that are better than some Americans. So in terms of the border problem right now, who would I trust most on that? Probably again Trump, right? And then you have the economy. Who's going to press Trump on the economy? I think that argument comes from probably your perspective of DeSantis and how he handled the COVID-19 crisis, how he's brought business to Florida. And then how Trump kind of failed in like having Fauci and Birx and other those in his administration. But then you have the perspective of look how good the economy was under Trump before COVID. You have the whole DeSantis and Disney thing that's going on in Florida right now that a lot of people that like me and you, like people who are interested in the economy, sort of a problem with, and the government being involved in private business negotiations and private businesses kind of operation in Florida. So that's a sort of problem. And if Disney gets a win over DeSantis, I don't know how that's going to affect his candidacy. So I think probably if I had to pick, it's going to be DeSantis or Vivek, I'd say. And then Tim Scott, just for pure how he speaks, how he appeals to the audience, and how he appears to the television viewers during the debates. But nobody really else. I think it is a 2-horse race, maybe like a 1.5-horse race at this point, if you look at polling, between Trump and DeSantis. And then I would be interested, kind of in the same way that like you have Andrew Yang. I think Vivek's kind of like the Andrew Yang, how he was in the Democrat nomination in 2020. And then you have somebody like Tim Scott who can kind of come off as maybe the VP choice or a cabinet choice that one of Trump or DeSantis is going to have. But it's really just a 2-horse race. And I do want to see these two men going back and forth against each other, because I think iron sharpens iron ultimately. I think debate and discourse is a great thing. I was a debater in college. I think that's what formulates our views on foreign policy, immigration policy in general. So I think that the debates are going to be very interesting. I'm looking very forward to them. And I think those are the four guys to watch out for, quite literally. It's Vivek, it's DeSantis, it's Tim Scott, and it's Trump. And I think it's going to be Trump and DeSantis for the final nomination.
You got me smirking there at the 1.5 horses. Sounds messy, but no, Kenny, let's go towards our final thoughts here, and I'll kick things off. And I guess, I take the whole COVID thing hyper personally, I guess. And maybe that's why I'm so fixated on it. And I mean, this kind of goes back. I mean, granted, like I think I built most of my libertarian cred throughout the 2020s and to today because of me being so vocally against what was happening with the lockdowns, namely because I was living it, right? I was living in Philadelphia at the time, blue city, in Pennsylvania, blue state, and not only seeing the government response to, and in many cases, and the enablement from the federal government of why they were doing what they were doing. like, oh, we're just doing what the CDC says. We're just doing what Dr. Fauci says. It's like, okay. But also the fact that I felt it on the personal level, right? And like hyper real, right, folks? Like, we're going to get very real right now. Like having my father-in-law and mother-in-law tell me like, oh, I don't know if we want you at Thanksgiving without a mask on because you're not vaccinated, right? That gets really uncomfortable. Having your best friends, your groomsmen in some cases disown you or say, oh, why are you making fun of people who are trying to save lives? You don't trust the experts, and disown you, right? Like you feel sometimes like you're on an island, and it's like, I'm taking all these slings and arrows fighting for what I know is right. And then I see someone like President Trump who says he's on our side, but then in the most important time just drops the ball entirely. And to your point, right, there are things he could have done better, and there are things he probably could have done a lot worse. But I guess that's why I instantly started to gravitate towards someone like a Ron DeSantis. Frankly, I think it's why folks like Thomas Massey out there have gravitated towards someone like a Ron DeSantis, because on this very, very important issue, DeSantis stands above all the other governors, not based on what he did, but that plus him vocally speaking out against the insanity and explaining why, right? Bringing folks to the table like Jay Bhattacharya, from the Great Barrington Declaration, and having conversations that were outside of the accepted 3x5 opinion card, right? Like being able to have these uncomfortable conversations, but do so in an honest manner, that really gravitated towards me. So I think going back to, why have I been so fixated on this entire conversation specifically pertaining to Trump and the lockdowns versus DeSantis and the lockdowns, is because I lived through it and I felt it. And I never want to see that happen again. Not just selfishly speaking of what I've experienced over the past 3 years, but what I've seen friends experience. I've seen loved ones experience. I've seen business owners experience. I mean, we've seen suicides skyrocket, depression skyrocket, drug abuse and substance abuse skyrocket, businesses closing left and right, families, relationships, friendships destroyed, communities wiped out, like cultural in entertainment, it completely nuked. And it breaks my heart to see that it didn't have to be this way, right? And Trump was the face of the response. And whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And that's what I think a lot of folks are going to be bringing to the voting booth, yours truly here included. So I guess that, I try to summarize my perspective here for this episode, why I've been a little bit of the thorn in your side today, Kenny, because I do think, I'm bringing forward an opinion that is held by a lot of folks out there. There's a lot of question marks. Like I was much more open to voting for someone like a Trump when we were like circa 2018, 2019, and then 2020 happened. And I felt like, all the trust that I had been building up there with him was just ripped out from underneath me. So I think he's got a lot to do to earn a lot of that trust back, but I'm just going to go on and on here at this point. So that's my final thoughts for today. Kenny, what do you have for us on your end?
I think your criticisms, Brian, are going to be something that's going to sharpen Trump's iron when it comes to 2024. And actually,
he's listening to me. Hey, Trump, what's up, man?
I think it's a great approach. I mean, truly, I think that when it comes to 2024, he has to answer a lot of questions. And I think people hate that DeSantis and Trump are going against each other. It divides the party. It's gonna destroy our chances for 2024. I think it's great because it ensures that Trump has to answer for his mistakes. And I think that's a great thing because every president, if you just don't worship at the altar of government or worship at the altar of a politician, every governor makes mistakes. Every politician makes mistakes. Every congressman, senator, whatever state legislature, they all make mistakes, including the president. So Trump is not the perfect candidate. He made mistakes in 2020 when it came to COVID, without a doubt in my mind, and he knows that as well, Brian. And that's kind of why I think his insults have been all over the place for DeSantis. So in the tweet you read earlier, you said DeSantis allowed this many deaths, and that kind of alludes to he didn't do enough on COVID, right? Like didn't lock down
and
enough,
he
didn't
pumped
have
up
mask.
Cuomo, like my man. What?
Exactly. But then last week or a few weeks ago, he said also DeSantis closed down beaches. So it's kind of he is attacking him for whatever. And that's kind of, to be between me and you, it's kind of what I view it as, is I don't really take that much seriously with those criticisms Because he's just looking at the wall of what sticks. What was said in the media in 2020, what was said in the media now, what was said 2018, 2019, whatever, and just throwing attacks because he is like that, right? He called Rand Paul ugly on the debate stage in 2016, like for his curly hair, right? It's just who the dude is, right? I mean, I hate to say, I know that people hate that excuse. This is just who Trump is, but I don't take it that much seriously as he would have if it happens again. He would lock down or anything like that, because he literally has criticized him not only for not locking down enough, but also for locking down beaches. So it's sort of hard for me to really take it serious. And it's just a primary battle, man. Like, I mean, these sort of attacks happen always. I mean, you've seen Tulsi go after Kamala Harris. You've seen Kamala Harris call Joe Biden racist and then be his vice president on the debate stage. This is just what a primary is. And that's kind of what I'm kind of struggling to kind of hold Trump to too much account and kind of criticize him for what he's saying right now, because this is just a primary battle. And I enjoy it. I think, honestly, when DeSantis and Haley, Pence, or whatever ask Trump these questions on COVID, he needs to be able to answer them, and he needs to be able to explain to the American people why he made the decisions that he did, why he said the things he said. And I hope he holds himself to account. I mean, I hope he holds Fauci's feet to the fire, Burke's, whoever else, and tries to at least answer to a lot what people like yourselves, independents and libertarians like yourself, have of him right now. And I completely understand where you're coming from when it comes to COVID. Absolutely. I went through a lot of the same things as a school employee here, especially. Like, as I told you earlier, I was vaccinated, and I wish I wouldn't have been. I got up far too early before I really know the potential adverse effects of the vaccine. And, you know, my brother never got the vaccine, and he was perfectly healthy and was never got COVID, never got sick, and it's affected people around me. I know many people that have had adverse self effects from it. I'm very thankful to God that nothing has happened to me over it. But I think we all made mistakes in 2020. We all made decisions and said things that we probably didn't mean at that point. And I think that's kind of just what humans are. And I think right now that he is just attacking DeSantis for needless things. I think it's just a silly primary battle, and it ultimately will get more serious as the debates come on. But I think Trump is still the dominant force. I think he is still the voice of the GOP. I still think a lot of the positions that I hold, I know for a fact that I would not be and I've said this on your show before, I would not be an anti-interventionist. I would not be as anti-surveillance state, and I would not be as anti-ATF, CIA, and FBI as I am right now if it were not for Donald Trump. Like, I know that in my heart of hearts, and I think that he is the reason that I am the modern Republican that I am. I want to change this party. I want to make it more anti-government corruption and anti-surveillance state, anti-war as it can be, and I think he's the guy to do it. And that's nothing against Ron DeSantis. I've actually met Governor DeSantis at a fundraiser in Knoxville and really enjoyed his company. You will not, regardless of what you see on Twitter, besides on some policy stuff, you will not see me attacking the person, and you'll not be able to see me attacking the governor that Ron DeSantis is, because I think he's a great governor and I think he's a great dude. But when it comes to my preference and my suggestion for 2024, I want the man who the establishment, corrupt government, and the large government hates, and that's Donald Trump. They hate him to every extent imaginable. The judicial system, the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, the NSA, people overseas, the military industrial complex, all the things that I hate in the world, they hate this man. And whoever they hate the most is who I'm for. And right now, I believe that Donald Trump is hated by those organizations and hated by the things that I hate more than Ron DeSantis is. And that's kind of why I think he is the voice. Trump is still the voice of the GOP, and he should remain the voice of the GOP.
Kenny Cody, it's been a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for joining us again. And I'm really looking forward to having these conversations once a week as we go through the news of the week, give our perspectives and some context here to the news, and definitely have these fun debates / engaging conversations. So, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, well, here's some housekeeping. Number one, please go ahead, give the episode a share. When you do, please tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. Kenny, where can folks go ahead and follow you?
You can follow me at KD Cody 10. It's right here on the screen. You can always find my muck rack online, Kenny Cody muck rack. You can look at all of the archives of the articles that I've written over the last 3 years. Can't believe it's been going 3 years now where I've been a nationally publicized columnist, but thankful for where I am. Find me on Facebook at Kenny Cody. Find me on Instagram as Kenny Cody, and be looking out for my new stuff, mostly posted on Twitter. Not that I'm not got that much of a following on Truth Social, but I do have a Truth Social. If you want to follow me there, it's the same tag as well. Look forward to engaging with everybody. Read my stuff, promote my stuff. If you have a question, my DMs are always open, and I'm always open to a conversation.
And some housekeeping, by the way, folks. You heard us today on the episode talking about some very controversial and potentially harmful subjects. Well, that's according to the overlords over at YouTube when I got my demonetization strike. So with that being said, yes, if you are ever feeling like you maybe won't find us somewhere because we're having these important conversations, well, please go support independent media like Sovereign, like Rumble. We are over there as well. And Sovereign is a great organization. It's promoted and actually led by Ben Swan from formerly of Reality Check. We had him in the show here back a few months ago or so, and just really, really strongly support what they're doing over on Sovereign. But yes, for the meantime, we are still, of course, over on YouTube while the overlords allow us. So while you're here, please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button, little notification bell, and yes, make sure you hit that like button. And by the way, if you want to make sure you don't miss a single episode of the show, you go to the YouTubes and we're gone all of a sudden one day. Well, make sure you head over to briannicholsshow.com. All of our episodes are there, all 725 other episodes. That's right. Plus, we have a lot of behind-the-scenes exclusives and some other available content for you guys as well. So please head over there. And if you want to go ahead and support the show, well, you can go ahead and do so by becoming a supporting listener at briannicholsshow.com/support. Either do a one-time donation, or you can become a recurring supporter. Or if you want to go ahead and get some awesome swag while you're along the way, head over to our shop at briannicholsshow.com/shop. I'm rocking our Magic Money Tree shirt here today. You can get that and more. Just make sure you use code TBNS at checkout. Give you 10% off. With that being said, that's all we have for you. Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show for the one and only Kenny Cody. We'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.